Einstein once said, "I have no special talents. I am only passionately curious." With such a spirit, you'll discover that raising questions is far more inspiring than finding answers. Einstein initiated a new paradigm shift in science with such a spirit. That's why it's better to raise good questions than to look for answers. In the previous video, we followed a golden thread of knowledge that links the ancient tablets of the past to the immortal scribe, Hermes, also known as Thoth, who takes different avatars across history. And since he writes history, in a weird way, it's kind of his story, no pun intended. We've seen how Hermetic texts like the Emerald Tablet have the power to launch great civilizations such as the Islamic Golden Age, the Age of Enlightenment, and even modern industrial, technological, and digital revolutions. Though there's no end to it, we follow the golden thread to where it ultimately leads us. And as we keep discovering these ancient texts, more questions about our true history are raised. In this video, we'll explore the Atlantean and the Lemurian races which inhabited Earth before us. The moment you start talking about Lemuria and Atlantis, many people stop listening because they've been programmed by the academic paradigm to believe those stories as nonsense. This is exactly the attitude that led us to this point where the history we learned only distorts our minds. The earliest known mention of Atlantis comes from two dialogues written by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, called the Timaeus and the Critias. These dialogues were written in the 4th century BCE, and they describe a powerful and advanced civilization that existed around 9,000 years before Plato's time. According to Plato's account, Atlantis was a great and prosperous kingdom located beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The Atlanteans were said to have been a technologically advanced society who mastered genetic engineering and nuclear power. Atlantis was a vast empire. However, they became corrupted by their own success and began to engage in immoral behavior, which ultimately led to their downfall. They faced self-inflicted destruction that was only made worse with natural disasters. Plato describes a catastrophic event that destroyed their center, Atlantis, as a natural disaster with volcanic eruptions and earthquakes that caused their great city to sink and disappear. This sounds a lot like a polar shift, but that's a topic for another video. However, that wasn't the end of the story of Atlantis. As we know from the previous video, Thoth the Atlantean, also known as Hermes, went to Egypt and many other places on Earth where he built civilizations and taught our ancestors writing, advanced sciences, and built the pyramids with his highly advanced technology. But Atlantis wasn't the only highly advanced society that inhabited the Earth. The Lemurians were already there before the Atlanteans. As a matter of fact, according to the Theosophist and Anthroposophist, they were a race that evolved after the Lemurians, the Hyperboreans, and Polarians before them. Basically, those were early forms of humanity that didn't actually have the human physical form that we are associated with. The Hyperboreans, the Polarians, and the Lemurians rarely take a physical form because they don't appreciate living in linear time. They only take a physical form when they like to. The Atlanteans, however, are more into experiencing linear time and building civilization. That's why they used to walk among men and demand being worshipped. According to Steiner, the Atlanteans began to fall from their spiritual heights and became increasingly materialistic. They developed advanced technologies that were used for destructive purposes, and they began to exploit the natural world for their own gain. This led to a series of catastrophes that ultimately destroyed the Atlantean civilization. Anyway, the idea of Lemuria originated in the 19th century as a hypothetical lost continent in the Indian Ocean proposed by British zoologist Philip Sclater. Sclater suggested that these animals were remnants of a land bridge that had once been connected to these regions. The concept of Lemuria evolved beyond its original scientific hypothesis and became associated with occult history. Theosophists, led by Helena Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner, adopted the concept of Lemuria in the late 19th century. They tell us that Lemuria was a highly advanced civilization that existed millions of years ago but was destroyed by a cataclysmic event. The Lemurians were psychic amphibians who had no gender or sexual reproduction. According to Steiner, the Lemurians are highly spiritual and communicate telepathically. They did not have physical bodies as we understand them today. However, according to Steiner, the Lemurians eventually began to descend further into physicality and became more materialistic. This led to the development of physical bodies and the emergence of gender and sexual reproduction. Steiner suggested that the transition to sexual reproduction was accompanied by a shift in consciousness, as the Lemurians began to experience a greater sense of individuality and a separation from the spiritual realm, which is eventually what led to the rise of the Atlanteans. When it comes to their distinguishing characteristics, the Atlanteans and the Lemurians had some major differences, not just in how they manifested. On the other hand, the Atlanteans are a noble race that built hierarchical structures. That's why they built pyramids wherever they went. It's believed that they had sonic levitation technology and mastered nuclear energy. Archaeological data from all over the world where pyramid structures are built supports this theory. The Atlanteans are behind major leaps in science and technology. The symbol of Hermes, who's the messenger of the Atlanteans, is always associated with science, wisdom, political cunning, philosophy, alchemy, medicine, mathematics, hermeneutics, and sacred geometry. All of these ancient philosophies are essentially what paved the ground for modern science and technology. Here's a thought experiment that I'd like to always keep in mind. Imagine traveling back in time to the 3rd BC Egypt. How would you describe the internet, smartphones, cars, and Tokyo City to those people? Everything you say would sound like a magical story to them. On the other hand, the Lemurians are freedom lovers who didn't like the laws of causality and artificial structures. Their architecture was more organic and in line with nature. Though not a very popular theory, psychedelics are actually believed to be super intelligent compounds, considering that many people who use such substances report meeting humanoid beings from other dimensions while under the influence. Psychedelics are very likely to be a technology developed by the Lemurians to communicate with us. After all, Lemurians are freedom lovers who don't appreciate artificial hierarchies. They are like the New Agers who initiated the free love movement. It's not a surprise that many of those people in the 50s, 60s, and 70s were the first to experiment with psychedelics on a massive scale. They channeled the message of the Lemurians. In anthroposophic terms, the Atlanteans are Ahrimanic and the Lemurians are Luciferic. The Ahrimanic force represents the spiritual principle of darkness and materialism, associated with the forces of decay and entropy. Ahrimanic beings seek to bind human beings to the material world and limit their spiritual potential, promoting a materialistic worldview and technological progress. The Ahrimanic force is also associated with the forces of control, power, and coercion, leading to a loss of individual freedom and creativity for the sake of creating advanced technologies. This is why we hear ancient stories tell us about ancient gods who created humanity to serve them and be their slaves. The Luciferic force, on the other hand, represents the spiritual principle of light and enlightenment, associated with creativity, inspiration, and freedom. According to Steiner, Luciferic beings seek to liberate human beings from the limitations of the physical world. However, the unbridled pursuit of individualism and freedom can lead to spiritual pride and arrogance, and ultimately to a detachment from the physical world, which is often manifested in artists and visionaries who are ahead of their times, like Nikola Tesla. This is similar to the stories of the fallen angels. The Atlanteans and the Lemurians had their radical ideas on how to run the planet, which led to the demise of their civilizations. However, they were not exactly good or evil in the simple sense of the word. On the one hand, Thoth is an example of a good Atlantean because they always interfere in human history to help us transition to a far more sophisticated understanding of the universe. On the other hand, Lucifer's temptation is what essentially led to the explosion from the Garden of Eden and the death and martyrdom of many people across history. It's important to note that the ancient pantheons, deities, and gods were named after great Atlanteans and Lemurians like Thoth, Zeus, Ishtar, Shamash, Poseidon, who was actually one of the kings of Atlantis, and so on and so on. And as we discovered in all these ancient stories, they're mainly the chronicles of epic battles, tyrannical gods, and apocalyptic destructions and recreations. For example, Hermes or Thoth, depending on how you prefer to name him, is often referred to in the ancient Egyptian coffin texts as a dignified being who resolves conflicts and teaches great wisdom. These coffin texts that talk about Thoth as a benevolent, powerful being are a collection of ancient Egyptian funerary spells written on coffins. Coffin texts are dated back to 2100 BCE. This powerful being keeps reincarnating during times of great discord and trouble, to help humanity progress forward towards higher states of being. He guides us through our evolution because he represents a higher power beyond the organic, non-local sorcery of the Lemurians and the advanced linear technology of the Atlanteans. Though he incarnates as Thoth the Atlantean, he also reincarnates as a Lemurian or even takes a human form. As far as we know, Hermes might be around somewhere watching over us and offering guidance, especially in our times. If a new paradigm shift takes place in the next few years, it's probably his essence once again guiding us towards greater spiritual heights. In the Hermetic text, Hermes Trismegistus writes in The Lament, part of Asclepius, his predictions of the downfall of Egyptian civilization and the loss of reverence for the highest power in existence, which is similar to what happened to Atlantis. He foresees that Egypt will be occupied by alien dwellers, and the land will be filled with corpses, while the Nile will be stained with blood. He also predicts that darkness will be preferred to light, and death will be thought more profitable than life. People will no longer believe in the immorality of the soul, and no utterances worthy of heaven and the gods of heaven will be heard or believed. The gods will depart from mankind, and only evil angels will remain. What Hermes describes is the age of bloody empires and wars that followed the fall of ancient civilizations. That bloody history never ended. We're still under the threat of facing the same fate of the Atlanteans, especially with the shadow of the atomic weapons that lingers around whenever our nations disagree with one another over how to rule the planet. The Hermetic message is essentially more about what we can learn from ancient occult history, namely the mistakes our forerunners faced. And Hermes is a benevolent angel who makes sure we all remember what happened not only intellectually, but also intuitively. He sets the golden thread of knowledge to all those who ask the right questions and are willing to follow their intellect and intuition to the ultimate end. Knowing what actually happened is close to impossible if we only use linear logic. Sometimes we need to let our imagination run wild. Hermes talks about the mind being the all and all being mind. This opens up a line of questions. If the mind is my mind and your mind, then what controls the mind as it is responsible for governing all our thoughts and actions? The mind is analogous to a battery, composed of positive and negative charges, with each charge being a component of an infinite spirit or soul. Upon one's passing from life to death, these charges are separated and reunited with the pool of souls until they are rejoined with another to begin a new life. Such a concept could be seen as akin to a simulation. Therefore, Hermes can be seen as the supermind that keeps manifesting during certain stages to fulfill a role in the cosmic symphony. In Greek mythology, they refer to him as the psychopomp. The term psychopomp refers to a spiritual guide or being that assists souls in transitioning from one realm or state of existence to another, particularly from the physical world to the higher planes of existence. Our personal experiences suggest that supernatural forces from beyond space and time can occasionally intervene and provide information or insight. The intricacy of the mind is fascinating, and there remains countless levels, entities, and elements that we have yet to comprehend fully. So, stay curious. Share your positive vibes and love energy with us by supporting our channel.